What an honor and privilege to get to spend some time with my mentor and friend, the great Neil Nathan. I've told you this before, Neil, but you've taught me more than any other physician, bar none, about how to actually heal patients, and I will forever be in your debt for that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. But where do we go from there?
I have lots of questions for you. We get to spend
Okay. No pressure.
time, no pressure. No, it's funny because I had to actually stop our conversation and hit record because we would go on for another 40 minutes. I want to talk with you about your perspective on functional medicine, on mold toxicity, because you've done this with integrity, with a deep respect for scientific literature and evidence and compassion for patients for longer than anyone else I know. And I think some of that long perspective gets lost in the new supplement, the new test. And so maybe we can start with just a question on your perspective of functional medicine, because it wasn't always here and it's evolved a bit over the past decade. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the field. What's it doing right? What's it doing wrong? Is it a good thing?
That's a very difficult question. So first of all, Joe, my interest has always been in healing, all aspects of healing. So when I went to medical school, the word holistic didn't exist. And when I would ask my attendings questions, they would usually look at me like I had two heads when I would say, why do you do this? Or this doesn't feel like you're really doing a complete evaluation of this person,
Right.
biochemically understanding what they're doing, but where are they emotionally or spiritually, or what's the meaning of life? Put their life in perspective in terms of
Yeah.
the zones. And they would go, what are you talking about, Neil? That's not what medicine is. And I realized that I went into medicine to be a healer, and that isn't what they were going to teach me in medical school.
Yes.
That's a somewhat long-winded way of introducing functional medicine. I think was intended to be a return to the full aspect of holism, meaning mind, body, spirit being one, incorporating all of that into understanding what a human being needs and how to assist them in their healing journey. So I think that functional medicine, which it's now a new word for what we called holistic medicine. Gosh, it had so many different names in the beginning. Integrative medicine, to me, is a better term. I don't know what functional means. It's like, what is functional in terms of what? I like the word integrated. To me, that means we are integrating all of these aspects into how we are thinking about how a human being is coping with what their life is handing them.
Got it. Do you see a difference because you train so many practitioners and you've done this for a long time, do you see a difference in the practitioners who came to you from maybe more of an integrative perspective 10 or 15 years ago than those who have done training with the Institute of Functional Medicine? Is there a difference in how they approach healing or thinking?
There is. I think the Institute of Functional Medicine started on the right road.
Yeah.
Then the way it's evolved, and I've taught for them in some of their courses, I know what they do, is it's very heavy on didactic information and very light on practicality.
I agree.
And talked to some of the people in that organization over the years without seeing any change in that. And so for a great deal of money, and unfortunately I think that entered into it, you can be certified in functional medicine, and that appeals to a lot of physicians, which is, I'm a young doc and no one's going to take me seriously, so I really ought to be certified in something if I'm going to say I do something. So that is, I think, the carrot that brought a lot of people into that organization, and they left that training program with a lot of interesting ideas and not a lot of practicality. So when I look at the physicians who are trained in that, what I often see them do is they will run all kinds of expensive tests
Yes.
and not fully understand what those tests mean
Yep.
and not know what to do in what order to actually heal the patient. So we're looking at reams of potentially interesting information with no over grasp of, okay, why is this person sick? Not what does their methylation look like or what does their zinc and copper ratio look like, but why is this person sick? What diagnosis would be what we call a core diagnosis or that would explain the vast majority of their symptoms? So many people that I see referred to me have had their EBV worked on for 3 years.
Yep.
It, if you really look at the symptoms of Epstein-Barr virus, barely explains a few of the
Yeah.
symptoms. So, well, but they have this high titer. I don't think that many physicians understand what those titers mean, and they have not put it into perspective. Yeah, but that doesn't explain these symptoms. We're not going down the right road here.
It's the EBV is definitely a trap. Came out of their 5-day training convinced that chronic viruses were something I was missing. And so I slammed patients with antiviral medications and supplements and diets, and somebody got better. And so I said, oh, this can't be right. There's something missing here. But unfortunately, people get stuck on the idea that it has to be this, and then they'll just keep going for whatever reason without progress. And sometimes they get trapped on Epstein-Barr, or sometimes it's methylation, or maybe a dozen other things. Would you say this over testing is the biggest stumbling block to practitioners helping those who are chronically ill?
I think I could make that statement. I think you're implying that all practitioners should be thinking more deeply before they test so that you're not getting patients to spend a great deal of money
Yes.
on tests that are not going to show that much.
Yes.
Sometimes I think it's being used by some younger physicians as an excuse for, I have no idea what you have, so I'm just going to test everything and maybe something will show up that I can use. And
Yep.
oh, great, you've got Epstein-Barr virus, or you're not methylating very well, or it looks like your mitochondrial dysfunction is acting up. And all of those are downstream effects. None of those are primary. So I think there is a tremendous over testing. It's not the worst thing in the world, but in the greater scheme of things, it's kind of unfortunate for patients, many of whom don't have a lot of money, that they're being told by charismatic young doctors that, oh, this will give us the answers that we're looking for. And I wish that the universe would take a step backwards and go, let me really take an incredibly detailed history from you. And in that history, there will be the information that I need to sort this through and really hone in on what are the most likely core central diagnostic features that we need to be looking at.
Man, this is why I love talking to you. I could not have said that better. And it's a thing that I see so often in patients coming in. And at this point in my career, I'm seeing people who come in and they've done the integrative thing and they're unwell, and they've done the conventional thing and they're unwell. And they've usually wasted a couple of years, thousands of dollars on these tests. And if you're made sick by mold and you have to do $5,000 worth of repair to your home, and you've already spent that on stool tests and all sorts of stuff that's not going to tell you the answer, you're out of luck. And so try to guide the patients to spending their resources on the treatments, right? The fixes, rather than the investigations.
To get back, the IFM training predisposes to thinking about the testing as the be all end all and isn't really geared to focusing people on the bigger picture of, okay, what would make this person sick? I keep coming back to it.
Yep.
Listen to their history, asking in-depth questions. And I was taught in medical school that the history will give you the diagnosis 95% of the time. Lab work will give you the diagnosis 5% of the time. I was taught that 50 years ago. I do not think it's changed.
No.
And yet we spend way more time on these minutia of
Yeah.
tests and don't put that 95% of time the way it needs to be.
I was given a different percent in medical school, but I was taught the same thing. And I wish more people would remember that. Sometimes the problem with these teaching organizations, if you were to take the cynical view, it would be, right, if the laboratories are funding the lunches and sponsoring the conference, they've got an incentive to talk up and promote these tests. And so it's a test-centric piece. And when the practitioners sell the tests for profit to their patients, which I think is unethical, and then they have a red flag, then they, of course, need to follow a retest, and then they get to generate another sale. And so this is one of the things I think lurks on the underbelly that's not talked about enough, is the dollars that are driving some of these bad behaviors. So only if you are cynical would you want to follow the money, right?
If you were realistic, you might want to follow the money.
Follow the money.
I think that it's a whole different conversation, Joe, but medical politics is another huge piece of things that both physicians and the public are often misled by political considerations of ideas and information. I'll mention it and we'll move on.
Yeah. In my practice, I'm seeing more overtly political reasons for coming in mistrustful for vaccines is just one example. And patients are just saying it, like, I will not do it. This is my belief and this is my politics. And I've never had that happen before. And so where we are as a society feels very different to me. I've been at this for only 10 years, but I feel like there was a distinct phase when I first entered practice, and then there was the pandemic. And now we're in this post-pandemic weirdness where I feel like there's a lot of fear and mistrust and anger and resentment that's just bubbled up and is just staying. And I can't help feel that it fuels some of the illness and the trouble we're seeing.
There's absolute truth to that. And it has to do with the way the pandemic was handled, which was, from my perspective, really badly on all levels. And the public gets that.
Yeah.
The public gets that the CDC is saying, on one hand, the current vaccines don't work very well, and they're being told that, oh, get your booster. And this is, how do you deal with that? And there is more and more research coming out, published peer-reviewed journals, that the vaccines did much more harm than we knew at the time. And the public is seeing that. And they're going, wait a minute, you vaccinated every man, woman, and child in the world with this information, and we were told that it was safe and that you had checked it. And now we're beginning to learn you didn't do due diligence. And they're looking at the profits of the vaccine companies and going, this wasn't right, guys.
Yeah.
We weren't treated correctly, and being told to wear masks and stay 6 feet apart and isolate ourselves and cripple our economy.
I think the isolation
Might not have been a healthy way of dealing with this. And so mistrust is earned.
Yeah. Let's pivot a little bit to mold. I first became aware of your work because I started finding patients who weren't getting better despite the treatments that made other patients better, and trying to find what made them sick. And most of them were living in moldy homes. And so I found your work and I harassed you until you taught me everything you knew. It's like grab onto Neil and just squeeze him, get all the juice out.
That's how I got there, Joe.
How you do it?
A lot of patients with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, and I got some of them.
Yeah.
But the things that used to work really well back in the 90s weren't anywhere near as effective by the time we got to the early 2000s. And that's when we began to look around for what else would explain. And Lyme disease emerged as a major player. Mold toxicity emerged as a major player. So we began to learn, literally on the job, if you will, that there were other pieces of the puzzle that we had not recognized.
And I think we're still, as much as we've learned, I think we're still learning on the job as it is constantly, those of us seeing these patients. Given that long view of seeing and treating mold for, geez, 2 decades before I came on the scene, what treatments did you think were helpful at some point, but you gave up as you realized they weren't moving your patients forward?
As I started working with Richie Shoemaker really early on,
Yeah.
2005, right after the publication of his first book, Mold Warriors. Now, in that book, there was a brilliant discussion of what he called the biotoxin pathway. And when I read the biotoxin pathway, I went, oh, wow, this guy has put together some really important information so that it begins to explain the complexity of what we're seeing and why. And so literally, I read that book. Actually, I read that chapter and called Richie and said, can I come study with you? Which is my nature. This is what I do.
Yeah.
And Richie was a little bit put off and went, who are you and why do you want to do that? And I explained what I was doing and why. And then he was okay with it. And I flew out to Pocomoke, Maryland and spent a week with him. And I learned that what he was doing and he wrote about in Surviving in Mold Warriors was a whole lot more complicated than he put in that book. It sounded like you just do a visual contrast test and you give cholestyramine and everybody gets well. But no, Richie is a much brighter person than that. And when I arrived in his office, he literally laid on me dozens of research papers on all of the different components of VIP and MMP9 and C4A. And I realized I had an education in immunology coming up that I had not anticipated. And he was using a variety of methods that were all based around his understanding of the inflammatory process. And I basically, if I'm making a new recipe, I will follow that recipe exactly the first time I make it. And then I will change the recipe to make it better from my perspective or more interesting or whatever.
Yeah.
After working with Richie and teaching with him for a few years, it seemed to me that some of the things that he was doing and teaching didn't work very well. And there needed to be other answers that I needed to be on the lookout for.
Yeah.
And eventually I started working with Joe Brewer, an infectious disease specialist in Kansas City. I was living in Missouri at that time. And so
Can I pause you and ask you to talk about some of the treatments that didn't pan out in your patients?
Sure. So one of the things that Richie made a big deal about in the beginning was doing a culture in the nose for a bacterial species called MARCoNS. And at that time, he was treating it very aggressively with triple antibiotics and beg spray. And I did that for a couple of years. And when you keep reculturing the nose, most of those people stayed MARCoNS positive, no matter what I did.
Yeah.
And I brought that to Richie's attention and I said, not only are they not getting the MARCoNS done, but they're not any better. Nothing is better. Maybe some sinus symptoms are a smidge better, but on the global things and all the things that mold toxicity does, I'm not seeing it move the needle one bit. And then we ran into other things. He relied on visual contrast testing for making the diagnosis. But we also knew at that time that visual contrast testing didn't just measure mold toxicity. It also measures Lyme. It also measures mold, mercury toxicity, and maybe other things that haven't even been discovered yet. And then the other primary diagnostic markers, which Richard was really hot on, were this TGF beta 1 and C4A and MP9, a number of these markers. And he viewed if you got the TGF beta 1 and the C4A back to normal, and if your visual contrast came back to normal, from his perspective, the mold was gone. And when I did that, I still had sick patients.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying these are interesting, but these markers are also not specific. They don't just measure mold inflammation, they measure any inflammation. So again, TGF beta 1 will measure inflammation from a wide variety of infectious causes, Lyme co-infections, chlamydia, mycoplasma. So if you're seeing it elevated, and a lot of our patients have both mold and Lyme, which are we measuring here and how are we measuring it and how accurate is it? So I became disenchanted with that process because my bottom line forever has been, is the being that is in front of me who has needs, who is sick, are they getting better under my care and direction? To me, that's the only thing that matters. If you're getting better, maybe I'm doing the right thing, even if I'm not great. I never want to take credit for healing. From my perspective, God heals. I just work here. But the
I'm s-
I was seeing patients that was doing everything by that book, and they weren't getting better.
and
A few did. Let's not make it global.
yeah,
Some people responded really well to cholestyramine, and some people did respond well to that, understanding that you had to get out of a moldy environment
yes,
and treat with the binder that we knew about back then was cholestyramine, and that was the treatment. And later on, we used VIP, nasal spray,
yeah,
to help clean it up. That was the basic treatment. And honestly, it still mostly is in that way of doing it. But I'll come back to working with Joe Brewer. I was
please.
looking for newer information. And Joe Brewer wrote a paper in 2013, which I think revolutionized the field. I'm not sure Joe gets the credit he needs to for it. We took 112 patients with chronic fatigue and measured their urine mycotoxin tests.
Mhm.
90% were positive. Well, that's very fascinating. But equally fascinating is he published 2 follow-up papers on a series of 100 patients each, treated with B as a nasal spray,
Yes,
or nystatin as a nasal spray, and binders and other things. And one of those studies, 94% of those were cured, and the other 89% of those were cured.
yes,
And in the medical field, that's impressive. I mean, I never expect 100% from anything. And I knew Joe personally and know that he is a very forthright, honest, good observer, didn't doctor his data. I knew that his data was solid. And I went, he's got something here. This is a missing piece for us. We need more binders and we need a more aggressive treatment for mold that is colonized.
yes,
Those 2 concepts were key. And at that time, Joe did a fairly deep dive into the medical literature on what binders work. And he found some research that was done by the Department of Defense on humans, one of the few studies in humans that exist, on what binders could pull mycotoxins out of the body once they were there. Keep in mind, we were using mycotoxins, studying them from the perspective of biological warfare.
biological warfare.
That's where the Department of Defense was interested. And their interest was, if it was used on us, how do we protect ourselves from this kind of thing? And that's when we learned that charcoal, clay, particularly, were good binders for many of the mycotoxins. And since then, and you've done the, from my perspective, the most comprehensive overview of that, we now know from medical studies, some in humans, mostly in animals, that we now know which mycotoxins are best bound by which binders so that we can approach this with what I will call precision medicine. That if I get a urine mycotoxin test back, I know what I need to give this patient to pull their toxins out. And if that is not sufficient, and the implication is that the patient is colonized, they're growing mold now in their sinus and gut areas, they're going to need antifungals for those areas to get well. And by putting that together, and again, I want to give Joe credit for it. He evolved the basic concept to
Yeah,
which he added. It's way more effective. Now we had a much more comprehensive way of treating everybody by knowing what's in their body and how to get it out. And to me, that revolutionized how we do it.
So you took, so Richie Shoemaker really gets credit for kind of launching this into the conversation and really being a forerunner. And then from my perspective, you looked around at how do we make this better for the patients in front of me, because there are brilliant ideas here, but it's falling short for too many patients. So you stacked Dr. Brewer's observations and research on top of Richie's protocol. And then over many years and many patients have come up with a more comprehensive way to deal with and treat mold. And that's what I saw when I wanted you to mentor me and teach me what you learned, because I was so fascinated that you took multiple theories and pieces of information and spent the work crafting it to see what works for patients or not. It's just a true gift to us doctors.
That's my nature. I love synthesizing information to make better information. That is my joy in life, where I will find a piece of the puzzle from someone and go, oh, that will make this better. Now I can help more people.
It's great. It's awesome. So we talked about some of the shortfallings of measuring all of the cirs markers, all those inflammatory mediators that can be elevated from a number of different causes. We talked about the fact that MARCoNS, treating MARCoNS doesn't move the needle for most patients. And I'm so glad you covered those, because to this day, I have patients coming in worried about MARCoNS. They bring me their swab. To this day, I have people in tears because they're getting elevated TGF beta 1 and they have all these ideas in their head what this means. And I am grateful that you did the work to help me understand that those are not productive ways, and we can steer patients away from those, because there's still issues now. As we grow and we're trying to figure out what is the best way to treat and diagnose this mold toxicity, there's always new ideas out there. And one of the ones lately that we've talked about is the idea that you can measure specific antibodies to mold toxins. Can you talk a little bit about your understanding of how Dr. Campbell developed this test and what it means clinically?
Yeah, before we go there, I just want to make a comment which I think is very relevant.
Please.
Once we had urine mycotoxin testing to tell us what is in the patient at this moment, very simply, from my perspective, if you are peeing out mycotoxins and we can measure it, it's in your body. That's where it's coming from. So as simplistic a concept as that is, not everybody even looks at it that way. So now that we could measure it, I was able to look at when the visual contrast and the TGF beta 1 normalized. If you were doing urine testing, you would see that the patient was not gone yet. They still had plenty of urine mycotoxins on. So those became even less useful for follow-up, meaning that no, you're not done when that goes back to normal. We still have a substantial body of mycotoxin in you that has to be removed, which makes it much clearer about where we are in space and time. And so for me, urine mycotoxin testing has enabled us to be able to look at the other ways that people evaluate it and go, okay, but that's not adequate to get where we're going. I think that's an important thing to realize, that we just didn't decide that the markers weren't as good. We could literally see that they weren't as good.
So that would be another distinguishing point from your perspective of maybe how your clinical approach evolved, is more of a reliance on the urinary mycotoxin testing. And
Right.
follow up, if a test is going to be useful, you're going to want to generally see a decrease in urinary mycotoxins as you treat them successfully. And
Correct.
can
Yeah,
you give
correct.
us your perspective there?
Absolutely. So from my perspective, when the urinary mycotoxins are gone, we're done with treatment. You're free of mycotoxin. The important thing there isn't that you're free of mycotoxin. It's that now what the mycotoxins were doing to your body was weakening your immune system.
Yes.
Now your immune system can rebound and once again keep everything at bay. So I think we get too caught up in I don't have mycotoxin anymore. The bigger issue is how your immune system is able to now keep everything under balance because it is now restored to its, if you will, former glory.
That's one thing that I've found in my experience of doing urinary mycotoxins is I no longer treat or track as often as I used to. I no longer treat to zero because I'm seeing that clinical shift where the immune system calms down before it gets to zero. And so if you've gotten to zero, that's wonderful, awesome. You get bonus points. From my perspective, it's not a necessity.
I don't disagree with that. I don't know that you have to get to zero. You have to reduce
You have
the
to
amount of
reduce.
mycotoxins so that the immune system can rebound. Once that's the case, now we're good to go.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying that because people do come in and they're fearful of any small amount. And I do know that lots of doctors will have the real-time lab in front of them and they'll scare the shit out of patients. They'll say, there's this tiny amount of gliotoxin, you're toxic, rip up your house. And meanwhile, the patients, you're like, you did it, you're fine. Like,
Again, I'm going to come back to, you have to look at the patient in context. So if the patient's fine, my job is done. But there's a little hook to that, which is if you do stop treating prematurely and you knock the mold down, not out for the count, in a small percentage of patients, I will put it at about 15%, the mold will regrow. Now, we don't have any way to measure the immune system as thoroughly as we need to say it has now fully rebounded. We don't have tests that will show that. So that is a measure of the fact that immune system hadn't fully rebounded, even though we got the counts down. And so sometimes we have to learn the hard way that we didn't do quite enough.
that's a great caveat. I think that's important for people to know that these things aren't absolute and they help predict and they're correlated with improvement, but it's not 100% guarantee.
So let's segue back to your question about Dr. Campbell's test, because
You read my mind.
now I think we can put that into different perspective. First of all, the urine mycotoxin test measures mycotoxins, meaning actually measures what's in your body. The myco test measures antibodies,
Yes.
IgE and IgG antibodies to mycotoxins. So what we're getting is not necessarily a measure of what's in the body, but a measure of what the immune system has been fighting that was in the body. Is it there now? Not quite clear, but I'll amend that statement in a minute. But it's an immune test, so it isn't quite as direct or specific as actually measuring the mycotoxins. Now, one of my biggest questions when this test came about was, do we know scientifically that if the antibody titers to mycotoxins come down, on what time framework will they come down? The reason I asked that question is we have what's called immune memory, the basis of immunizations, in which if you get exposed to a particular microbe and you make antibodies to that microbe, those antibodies will persist for a varying period of time, years mostly, not usually weeks. And so if we're using that test to follow the presence of mold in the body, how does that work? Because immune memory would prevent those numbers from accurately reflecting what's happening. And so I asked that question of both Dr. Campbell and Dr. Aristovajani, who developed the test. I spent it. Dr. Campbell, unfortunately, would not answer my question. Every time I asked him a question, he would say, basic immunology, go look it up. But I'm aware of basic immunology. I'm asking, do we have any research data to show how this passage of time? And he's never answered that question for me. Dr. Vajani gave me a much more detailed answer, but admitted we don't have that data.
Yeah.
So we have a test out there, which honestly, if it's positive, it does tell you have mold toxicity. If you have an IgE positivity, it is likely that this is ongoing, acute onset mold toxicity. IgG, who knows when you got exposed or how long that's going on. So my biggest problem with it is, okay, any of the tests you do to measure mold toxicity, be it real-time, vibrant, mosaic, myco, a positive test is a positive test. From my perspective, yes, that confirms you're working in the right area.
Yeah.
The next question is, how accurate are these tests for follow-up? Meaning, can I rely on those numbers to know you're getting better because the numbers are coming down? And honestly, the only test that gives me any feedback that I can rely on is real time. I don't see it with Mosaic, I don't see it with Vibrant, and I don't see it with my Myco. So these are okay tests to make a diagnosis. I find, why do a test to start when I'm not going to follow up with that test? I want a baseline test that will give me a follow-up that I can work with. So my bias, and for listeners out there, I have no financial connection to any lab or product or substance that I'm going to be talking about today. That doesn't exist. So
Important.
this is as clean as I can make it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's Dr. Campbell has a large voice in the field because he did some amazing research early on about the immunology of mold. And so we got to honor that contribution. But at the same time, he's part of the company. He's part of my myco lab. So when he talks about how the urine mycotoxin tests his competitor are not accurate, I find that suspicious.
I find that when you have a financial interest in anything, there's a tendency to overstate claims that can go from minor to being major. Now, the other part, if we want to talk about Dr. Campbell's program, is he really hasn't changed the program since he developed it in 2003. He basically, he uses only charcoal as a binder and only Sporanox in high doses as an antifungal, and a few other supplements in there. But those are the only two things that are particularly specific. Now, that will work for some patients. But again, looking for a more comprehensive treatment program, we know that charcoal will only bind a few of the mycotoxins that we're going to see on that report. And Sporanox won't work on all of them. So it's an okay program. And the other major issue with Dr. Campbell's understanding is, like Dr. Shoemaker, they both absolutely do not want to look at urine mycotoxins, which is the elephant in the room. Now, on Dr. Campbell's part, he will trundle out, when he gives his lectures, a paper published in 2003, which, from his perspective, said that it is impossible for the body to excrete ochratoxins in the urine. Now, if you're
It's wrong. That's just wrong.
it's flat out wrong. But if you actually read the paper, it doesn't exactly say that. I can see how he drew that conclusion, but it doesn't really say that. And the problem is, ochratoxin is one of the most common mycotoxins. All three other labs find it almost universally in most of our mold toxic patients. Having personally looked at 10,000, 15,000 urine tests from all three labs, how is it that something that cannot get into the urine is present in so many people? So forgive me, but dismissing a test as not even under consideration because you have this idea is silly from my perspective. It's like throwing out the baby with the bathwater for not even realizing it was a baby that you're throwing out in the bathwater.
I love it. I'm really glad that we can just call it how it is, because I've had patients who've interacted and they felt bullied and weren't listened to. And I think that patients deserve a little bit more from those approaches.
So again, like you, I want to honor Dr. Campbell for his earlier work. He and Michael Gray and Jack Thrasher wrote some of the earliest papers of mold toxicity. They were leaders at that particular time. I want to honor Dr. Shoemaker for having further the conversation and really, with his biotoxin pathway, making it clear that this is very real, this is biophysiologically understood, we understand what's happening with this, and now we need to move this into the 21st century.
Yes.
Into, okay, we have learned a lot of other new things, and let's, as you're saying, let's synthesize this, let's bring this information together so we can help the majority of patients and not just a handful, because we're only looking at a little piece of what's happening here.
I love that answer so much. We learn from what's done before and try to always do better for our patients. Let's see, Neil, let's change the subject and I'll throw you a curveball. Two curveballs. You wrote an amazing book called Energetic Diagnosis. And you talk a lot about how there's more to medicine than just lab values and prescriptions and supplements, and that there's a healing relationship, and that at some level, healers can become sensitive to their patients' needs on different levels. And so my question is, how can healers become more intuitive?
It's a very good question. And my answer is by trusting the intuition that they already have. So in medicine, as in many other areas, intuition has never been an honored subject for discussion. It's always been science, objective. What do you see right now? What's in front of you? What can we measure? That's fine. Absolutely fine. But human beings are wired to have many more perceptions than are limited by that God science, if you will. So we're all born with intuition. Every human being on the planet has it.
Yeah.
What is intuition? I think it's a mishmash of pattern recognition, where if you've done something for a period of time, the things you're looking at have patterns. For example, in medicine, you and I, Joe, have worked in the field of mold toxicity for a long time. And if a patient comes and sits down in the room, as they relate their symptoms, pattern recognition is, oh, I've seen this picture before. I've seen it many times. This is a mold toxicity case. I get it.
Yeah.
And if you've worked in functional medicine for a long time, I've also seen a lot of Lyme disease. And you can have, although there's an overlap of symptoms with Lyme disease and mold toxicity, there are certain symptoms that when I hear it, it's, yeah, I think you have mold toxicity, but there's something more than that. That the mold doesn't do all the things you're talking about. You're giving me some symptoms that are far and away something else.
Yeah.
And so I need to expand what I'm thinking about, is not throwing you into the, okay, this is mold, let's just work on that. But it's not adding up. So in terms of pattern recognition, if we're honest with ourselves and we don't get sloppy, we can look at what I will call outlying symptoms and go, gosh, I've seen a lot of mold toxicity, and that's not a symptom. Something else is also going on that I need to figure out. So that's pattern recognition. Then there's, if we're going to layer onto that, what I will call energetic intuition, meaning I believe that we're all born with what some people call psychic gifts. I don't like that word because it has low connotations to it. I think we're all born with perceptions. I can talk about myself, for example. I have several gifts. The most prominent is what I call the gift of knowing. Now, the gift of knowing simply means I can sit with someone and all of a sudden, for no reason, I will know something about it that I have no business knowing. They haven't talked about it. They haven't hinted at it. Hasn't come up in conversation. Now, am I picking that up from reading their eyes, their body language, energy radiating off them? Honestly, I don't know. But what I do know is that I am getting accurate information, because what I've found over the years, this is where my answer to you was trusting, which is when I first started getting these perceptions, my first reaction was, what's that? Why, brain, why are you giving me this information? I have no reason to know this, or how could I possibly know this? Go away, go away. I want to stay scientific here. I just want to get
Yeah.
the information from my patient. And yet, literally, something was radiating from that person that when I got up my courage to ask them about what I was perceiving, it was spot on almost 100% of the time. And I began over time to trust that.
Can you give an example?
I'll give you several. The first one is maybe one of the more dramatic ways. The first time it happened to me, I'm sitting in my office and one of my colleagues referred a patient to me because she was having recurrent ovarian cysts and it was really messing with her whole life. He was a GYN at the time and we were friends, and he knew that I delved into deeper layers of things that he didn't feel like he had the space to do. And I'm sitting with this woman, and almost as soon as I started just talking with her, a typed message came across my visual field, and it was, ask her about the time she was raped. And my initial reaction to that is, I can't do that. It's so rude. What if she slaps
Wow.
me? But oh, and then a few minutes later, in bold print, italicized, ask her about the time she was raped. And again, I can't do that. I view myself as a kind, gentle being. I don't confront people like this. That's not who Neil is. And then, big, capital letters, ask her about the time she was raped. And if there's a quality in me, for some reason, I decided to go with it. Instead of push it away, I just said, tell me about the time you were raped. And she broke down in sobbing, tears, and told me one of the more horrific stories I've heard as a physician, in which when she was 13 years old, she was raped when she was babysitting for her sister's children. Her husband came back early and raped her. And no one believed her. And she got pregnant from that. And the family ostracized her. She's 13 years old. And it's just horrible. And one of my skills at that time, one of my things that I was learning how to do was when people had horrific experiences, I had been learning that if you could get them to relive those experiences and release the emotion that they were holding on, it could be gone. It could lift that burden. And so I did some breathing work with her that literally I asked her semi-hypnotically to remember that experience and just let the emotions go, let them all go. And she sobbed for a very long period of time. And I think we repeated that experience once more, and her ovarian cysts were gone, never recurred. And that was my introduction to them.
Amazing.
So soon afterwards, I was in the ER, not as the ER. One of my patients was admitted from the ER with a bunch of odd symptoms, fever, chills, things like that. Did not have a headache and did not have a stiff neck. And type message, okay? This one was more specific. It said, this is meningitis. And so I decided to trust the message and did a spinal tap. Now, I technically had no indications to do a spinal tap, and this is no small thing to do. But it came back positive for viral meningitis. And that was the beginning. After a while, I no longer got typed messages. I just knew things. It didn't have to be typed anymore. Somehow my subconscious thought I need to actually read it to internalize it. So I would just sit with people and know things. And I call that the gift of knowing. And I do not think this is rare. I don't think I'm unique. I think that a lot of people have this gift. And there are many other gifts. There's gifts of clairvoyance. People can see the future. people have clear audience where they can hear things and learn things about people. There's a whole bunch of these gifts. All of us are born with them to some extent. And the issue is our society kicks them out of us as fast as it can. It is unusual for our parents to hear us talk about, I don't know, imaginary friends or seeing monsters or whatever it is that kids see that are
Yeah.
different perceptions. And will basically say, oh, no, you don't see that, and they'll go away, as opposed to saying, that's interesting. Tell me more about it. What are you seeing exactly? And what is happening? We don't, as a society, nurture those. We tend to go, that's not, I don't want the neighbors to know about this, and I don't want this weirdness to be appearance. But so we kick these gifts out of ourselves, but they're still there, and they have a bad habit of coming up in our lives, sometimes when least expected, and sometimes just emerging. So my comment to your question is owning them and seeing where they go is the way to nurture them. Now, there are whole books about how to nurture your psychic skills, and that's okay. But I think what really happens is to trust it. It was only because I trusted those initial type messages that I realized I do not know where those messages came from. I know they were divinely inspired in some form because they led to they led to healing. So I learned to trust them. And I know that other people have. So I think my message is whatever gifts you have, nurture them, trust them, pay attention to them, listen to them, watch how they play out, and then you'll begin to, then the gifts will become more a normal event for you.
When you were talking, I remembered a time when that happened to me, and I hadn't thought about this in a long time. But as a know-nothing intern, we had a patient that I admitted from the emergency room, and it was the kind of the ER doctor presented to me, bring him up to the floor. We think this is a heart attack. And so I went in and did the evaluation, and just something was wrong. It wasn't a heart attack. And for whatever reason, I only had a couple patients to take care of in that night shift. And so I went in to check on him, and I went in, and it just, this is a ascending aortic aneurysm. I just knew it. I had never seen that before. I'd never treated it before. I hadn't studied it recently. I just knew it. And so I just felt so compelled, and I couldn't tell you why it was, but I just pulled levers as a know-nothing intern and got a CT scan. It was an aneurysm. And then I called the CT surgeon in, and I think it saved his life. I think he would have died catastrophically in a few hours. But had I not listened to that, patient would have gotten better. But it gave me reinforcement that you can know things that sometimes aren't just obvious. And I'll tell you, the CT surgeon loved me for the rest of my training. This guy, he's sharp. And so I think I made the rest of my residency easier because the CT surgeon liked me. I had to call the man to wake him up in the middle of the night. I was terrified.
And I think that's a beautiful example of what I'm talking about. It's having a perception out of left field and trusting it to the point that you are acting on it and then maybe saving a life in that process. That's beautiful. And again, what I believe is that those gifts are to all of us in different degrees. I have other people who can't do what I do, but can do something else that they can. Some see auras, for example, and I don't see auras. That's not in my wheelhouse. So some people have given me credit over the years of being a very good diagnostician, and I suppose I am, except I'm being force-fed the diagnosis sometimes. This is not always. Listening audience, I do not have that perception with every person I've ever talked with. It comes when it comes. It's a divine gift. And when it comes, I listen. If it's not there, I operate in my normal operating way.
I'm grateful you shared it, because I think I hope that people listen to it and listen to their own intuitions. From a patient's perspective, I always encourage them to just share what they're thinking, because I can't remember the last time someone came in and said, Doc, I just think it's this. They're always right, like every single time. And I've just learned to go with that many times. It's not that the patient tells me how to diagnose or treat, but when they say, I just feel like, and they say it in a way, and you just know. And I say, hey, look, you've been thinking about, you've been having this symptom and experience. I've been listening to you for 10 minutes and you've been in your brain for a lot longer. Let's go with that for now.
Again, that's a really lovely way to see this. And I would agree that the vast majority of time, I will seek a patient's own intuition of what they think is wrong. But I will also say that sometimes that's messed with by external information that they are processing. So if they get
Mhm.
in the hands of someone else who they respect, they may
Yeah.
get
Dr. So-and-so online says it's parasites. I have a parasite. And so,
that's what I mean. So that if they have seen another healthcare provider before me who may have not a comprehensive way of looking at it, and they've stuck this in a particular category, that person may come in already obsessed with,
yes,
I know it's this, I know it's this, it's,
you have to spend
yep,
time unwinding that with them. And that's very different than I think the intuitive sense that we're talking about.
right. But talking them out of it is very difficult because they're already attached to that piece of information. And you're right, that is not their intuition. But if you ask them, what is your intuition? They're going to spew back what they have
Heard from
picked
the last
up,
practitioner or read on Reddit or whatever.
they picked up elsewhere.
Yeah.
So that is, if it's true intuition, absolutely. And it's, again, as a practitioner, it's not always easy to tease apart from a patient. Is this a true intuition on your part, or did someone plant ideas in your head about what you have that you bought lock, stock, and barrel at that
I
time?
got to think about that because I feel like there's something very different about how they communicate it. If it's something they've just been reading and hearing rather than something.
There, you're right. There is a difference energetically. You can pick that up, but then there is a spectrum of to what extent that occurs. And at one end of the spectrum, it gets a little harder to tease. Think about
I, you know me, I will.
it.
I
I
will.
know.
Let's see. As we get closer to wrapping up, you've treated patients who have suffered for a long time. What would you say to someone who says, I've been sick forever and I can't get better? I've tried everything. What would you want them to hear?
I'd want to explore with them what they had done, whether they'd ever had a right diagnosis, to what extent they truly feel helpless and hopeless, to what extent do they think there's any chance that they're getting better? If someone absolutely believes at a very deep level that they can't get well, they can't. Uh, so what I'm looking for is fluid, is their belief system about their ability to get well.
You talked about you see a spark in them, whether it's a desire to fight, a curiosity, a goal they want to achieve. Some patients have that and they can be sicker than most of your patients. And you know that they're going to get there eventually. And then there are some patients who are just determined to not be.
Again, that's more in the intuitive sense of picking up something energetically from that person. Maybe it's a little bit of my knowing gift, but I don't think so. You refer to it as seeing a spark. I call it seeing a light in them, although there's nothing visual about light whatsoever. There's a feeling of life force. That's the right words.
Hmm.
Together this way before. It's a sensation that person has, it still has life force that is capable of getting. And when I don't feel that someone has that, they rarely get well. But when I feel they have it, and I've stuck with some of those patients for 8, 10 years, somewhere along the line, they manifest that and they get well. And so it's kind of like having a faith in them that maybe they don't even have themselves, that you may not know it and maybe you can't see it. I can see a life force in you that makes me feel like the time I put into working with you is going to be rewarded eventually for you.
That's wonderful. It's like they can borrow your hope until they see it themselves.
The work that we do is very complicated, and I often jokingly say that what I do a lot of is pep talks.
Yeah.
And I
It's
and I
deeper than
think
that. But yeah, there has to be.
and I think that's a very valid use of our time when we work with patients, because after treating mold toxicity or Lyme disease, this is a long, drawn out affair. Takes a lot of stick to itiveness, a lot of discipline, ups and downs, fluctuations. People just need to know that on a deep level, I have faith that you can get well. And that sometimes helps them have more faith in themselves that they can get well. And then, no matter how slowly it occurs, as they actually begin to feel better, then that feeds on itself.
Yeah.
Then then they can go,
Yep.
I am better. I have more energy. I can think more clearly. I am moving down the healing path. And then once they're past that threshold, then
Yeah, that's such a key moment. And this is why when I first see someone, I am like obnoxiously meticulous about cataloging their symptoms and how often and how severe and when and what is it triggered by and how does it feel? Because usually within the next visit, many of those have already started to crack and change. And then when you remind the patient, you said this and this, now look where you are. It's like you see the light because they forget how bad they felt. And so you can remind them, they're like, oh my God, you're right. I was having bloody diarrhea 12 times a day and now it's only 3. Like,
people do forget. And so one of my questions I ask at every visit, some of my patients don't like it because they don't think this way, is can you put a percent on how much better you are than you were when we started? And some people go, I don't think in percents. I don't. Okay, so give me other numbers on a scale of 1 to 10. Do it whatever way you want.
yep. I
And
stole that from you, by the way. And I use it every visit. It works really well.
it gives them a sense of understanding how far they've come. And it gives me a sense of, okay, are you 50% better? Great. Then we've accomplished a fair amount at this point. 25% better? No, we got a lot of work to do.
Maybe we're going down the wrong path and we need to change a bit.
So I'm not looking for 22.6934%. I'm just a ballpark of a little better.
I had an engineer who told me like 82.6. I was like, I respect that. Can we,
Occasionally I get those, but it gets, I think, but the bottom line is that is a tool that I have found extremely useful in helping us put the whole interaction that we have together in some perspective.
I agree. Ask you one more. I'll say one more, probably 2 or 3. But one more thing that's fascinating to me, and this really helped in a way in my practice, but in energetic diagnosis, you have a chapter entitled, There Are Those Who Wish You Harm. Why did you include this in your book?
I wrote the book, or started writing it. Books have a life of their own. They just morph over time. But I wrote the book because it was a departure from any of my other books. It was very personal. I tell a lot of personal stories in it. But I wrote it to really begin a dialogue in our profession of the importance of intuition, including it in medical education, including it in the diagnostic workup, so that, when you grill medical students about what's this number, what's that, and what that, and then you should also be asking, and intuitively, what do you think they really have? That should be a question we're asking to teach medical students to look into that inter-energetic connection they have. So I wrote the book for that, primarily. But because I was talking about energies, I couldn't leave out, I'll backtrack for just a second. I teach a lot of younger physicians about how to practice medicine.
Yeah.
And over years, some of the things that I've learned, I really want to impart to them, because if I knew that when I was younger, it would have helped me a lot. And one of those things was realizing that you need to really be paying attention to your interaction with that other being in terms of how does that person affect you in the interaction. Now, one aspect of that is what we're currently calling energy vampires, meaning you can be with a human being and inexplicably, when they walk out of your presence, you are drained. And if you don't understand what's happening, it just makes no sense. Like, what just happened? I don't know.
Exhausted. Yeah.
It's drained, like I suck dry, literally. And I believe that happens not just in the medical context, but with anybody seeing an acquaintance on the street and you stop and talk and having a great day, and all of a sudden that day is gone. It's like, what happened? And then you begin to realize every time you interact with that person, it happens that way. And then you realize you're dealing with what we call energy vampires. And these are very real. These are people who are, for their own personal reasons, in need of your energy. There's a hole inside of them. Now, that hole is a black hole. It cannot be filled up. So they can suck dry every person they walk down the street next to and talk to, and they still won't be filled. So you're not actually doing anything for that person, because they can't use what you're giving you, but they can deplete you. And so part of it was to alert all people, not just the patients and physicians, that these folks exist, and please pay attention to them, because if it happens once, you need to be protecting yourself so that you don't put yourself in their way. Now, a lot of young doctors will go, I can't do that. They're my patient. And I'm going, okay, you want to get sucked dry once a month? Fine, go ahead. And many of our colleagues do that until they wake up. Now, keep in mind, this person's not just sucking you dry, they're sucking dry your receptionist, they're sucking dry your nurse. They're taking it all the way out of the clinic. And not just you that's involved, it's your whole staff that's involved. So when you find someone like that, you need to let them go. They will add nothing to your lives except deplete you. And so that's one aspect of what I think you're talking about. In addition to energy vampires, there are people who I will call toxic, meaning that in their presence, they will stir up in you all that when you leave their presence, you will need to talk about it for hours or days afterwards. Another way of looking at this, my wife and I used to have a way of looking at when we went to dinner with another couple. If we didn't talk about them at all when we drove home, they were great. But if we talked about them and dissected our interaction in detail, they were tough. And often this would go on for days. And I think that talking about is a detoxificational process for us. So if you have interactions with human beings and you somehow have to detoxify from it, and that is, again, very, very, those are not people you want to be interacting with, because they may also be energy vampires, but they may leave you just discombobulated and lost. And I don't know where I am right now. I just know that I've got stuff that I somehow picked up, some energy that I've got to get rid of. So those were interactions that I wanted people to be aware of, so that they didn't just accept them, but actually protected themselves from those interactions so that they would not be held captive. The hardest of those is that some of those folks are in your family. So have Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving or Easter or whatever the occasion may be, there may be a particular family member who either sucks you dry or leaves you going, I can't be here. I can't even be in a room with this person. That's more difficult because then you have to figure out how you can minimize your interaction with that person to not pick up on their toxicity. So those were why, thank you for bringing it up, Joe. That's why I wrote the chapter. Eliminating those interactions for all of us as human beings would enhance our lives greatly.
When you first taught me about this idea, I immediately identified a couple patients in my practice that I realized had no intention of getting better. They weren't putting in the work. They were a drag. They were negative. I'd feel exhausted and bad after. And just, I think what happens is that those of us who become healers are generally empathetic people. We want to help, right? We want to give. And so I think there's a natural kind of inclination. If you're someone with a personality disorder, you have this hole, you have this need, and then you have this really giving doctor, they latch on. And
fresh meat.
Identifying them and just letting go of the patients that I recognize I'm not going to be able to help, it really made a big difference to making my life happier. Because if you don't do that, your practice is just going to become full of them. And then you would want to work with people that make you feel good and that you can help. And I think there's something too that young doctors need to know.
And I hope the listening audience understands that I've been practicing medicine for over 50 years, and I took a long time to learn this. I had myself sucked dry for many years. I had myself deal with this toxicity for many years until I woke up to the fact that I did need to subject myself to that. And what you're talking about, Joe, is if we perceive ourselves to be compassionate, loving beings who want to help people and we're empathetic, we're sitting ducks for that type of energy.
Yeah.
We can still be that way, but not for all beings.
Not for all.
I think that spiritually, I had been laboring for a very long time under the misperception that if I was truly spiritually awakened or spiritually moving on the right path, I would love all beings. I would be able to be in the presence of all beings and radiate what love I have and help them all. And that's a very sweet idea, but not all beings want to be loved, and not all beings want that. And what they want for me is literally negative. And so when I said there are some people out there who want to harm us, I meant that some people
very countercultural from what we are taught. Yeah.
It's not a turn the other cheek thing. It's a wake up to the reality and go, this is not a being where my love and empathy and compassion is going to help them one bit, but they are going to mess with my life for the next few days by this interaction, which I'm going to have to work out by talking about it or doing whatever I did. So.
I think that's going to help a lot of people struggling with burnout. I think this is related, particularly if you're stuck in an area of medicine where you don't have the opportunity to remove yourself from some of those patients when you practice in situations that don't give you the flexibility. Neil, thank you. Thank you. I know that this is going to help a lot of people, and I know I learn every single time I talk to you. Thank you so much for spending some time with me.
My pleasure, Joe. You're one of my favorite people. Hanging up with you for a while. It was a pleasure.
Hopefully the opposite of energy vampiring.
If the world looks at the smiles on our face at this moment, correct. Vampire. There's no vampiric energy in this room at all.
Knew it. Knew it. All right. Thank you. I will talk to you real soon, I'm sure.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. Take care.